So there have been a ton of posts on the Warrior forums lately complaining about Battleground PvP, in particular 1v1s. I've been reading everywhere that Warriors are subpar when it comes to 1v1. Skill and gear being equal, you will lose 1v1 at 100. Warrior is the most heal dependent class out there, always has been. The problem is that the people are not running the right build, because with the right build, Warrior is actually a pretty good 1vn class. It has a good bit of survivability, and I'm going to explain how you can set up a Fury Warrior to have that build. It's something that's known. A lot of people knew about it. They knew about it last season, right? They know about it now, but there's still a lot of people that just don't get this. It's like they're trying to run a Battleground solo on a burst build Fury or on an arms warrior, and that's just not going to work out well for you in most engagements. Now, you can always kind of cop out and take the easy path and go with Prot or Glad, but if you're still wanting to do a Fury Warrior, then this build will allow you to have the survivability to go out and do 1vns. Here's a guy dripping with sarcasm. Warriors are likely the strongest 1v1 class out there. No, they're not the strongest, but they have a strong build that can do quite well in just regular battlegrounds. For casuals that like to solo PvP, a warrior is really the strongest at it. Wait, weren't we being sarcastic? LOL DK. Yeah, I have a DK. I also have a warrior. I play them both. And this is going to be from the point of view of a survival build Fury Warrior that I do just as good on when I go out solo and 1vn as I do on my DK, if not better. Concentrating on the survivability part of this build rather than damage part. Of course, you do sacrifice damage in order to have survivability, as it should be. But the key things here are, well, you always sit in defensive stance, so you always have a 20% decreased damage, and you're going to have unquenchable thirst, so your bloodthirsts are not going to have a cooldown, right? Instantly strikes a target for low damage, generates 10 rage, so since you're spamming bloodthirst, right, you're always generating rage, and I have it glyphed where it restores 2% of your health, which doesn't seem like a lot, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Bloodthirst has an additional 40% chance to be a critical strike. Okay, so that's important because you need enrages. This is the thing right here where I think a lot of warriors don't use it. I've fought a lot of warriors, Fury Warriors, where they're in trouble and they never use shield barrier a single time in the fight. Shield barrier is huge for survivability. So 20 rage, it has a 1.41 second cooldown, so you can practically spam it, as long as you have rage. Improves your defenses, absorbing 7,300 damage for the next 6 seconds, consumes up to 40 additional rage to increase the amount absorbed. Okay, so you do need to have some damage, and where is this damage going to be coming from? It comes from being enraged. Bloodthirst critical strikes and activating Berserker Rage will enrage you, generating 10 rage and increasing damage done by 10% for 8 seconds, but for Fury Warriors, Mastery, right here, increases damage done while enraged, right, by a certain percentage, which is why you're going to stack Mastery with this build. I've seen some people on the forums, they say, no, you need to stack Critical Strike, because that's the one that scales up better for us from Cruelty. Right, you gain 5% more of the critical strike stat from all sources. But you're going to have enough critical strike because of that bonus for Bloodthirst to crit, right? And because of the 2-piece bonus from the PvP set, talk about that shortly, where you're pretty much going to have almost full uptime on Enrage. Right, and I'll demonstrate that on a target dummy in a little bit. So it's better for you running this build. Right, I'm talking about having Unquenchable Thirst where you're spamming Bloodthirst, right, to just go full mastery, so you can get some damage, going. So this is a sustained damage build because it's not going to be using things like Siegebreaker. It's not going to be using sudden death. So it's not about burst to kill people. It's about surviving and sustaining to kill people. It is a total sustain build. And of course, to have a sustained build be successful, it has to be survivable, right? So there is a Fury Warrior build that does have that type of survivability. Okay, so these are the talents that I run with. I like double time for soloing. Again, I'm running around without a healer, and I'm usually running by myself into battlegrounds, specifically going into places where I know I'm going to have 1v-ins. I'm trying to solo fights, right? Double time is extremely important for that. When you have a healer, you can afford to take Juggernaut, because then you'll get more charges over time. But when you're running solo and you're fighting multiple people, well, if someone's low, you need to finish them. They need to die. You can't necessarily wait around for your next charge to come active. 12 seconds is a long time, and you really sometimes need to do back-to-back charges to finish someone off. So I like double time for that reason. Enrage regeneration is the only choice from this tier that's any good. Okay, and here is the key, right, to survivability with Fury, Unquenchable Thirst. Bloodthirst no longer has a cooldown, so you can spam it, and by spamming it, it's going to be generating rage, right, from just using it, and then more rage when it crits, and when it crits you get enrage, which increases your damage. For this build, running around solo, I think Stormbolt is really the only good choice, because you're going to run across a mixture of melee and ranged, and Stormbolt is very good against kiters and ranged, right? And it's also effective against melee. So Stormbolt is effective against both melee and range, where Shockwave, is not as effective against range, obviously, when you're getting kited. This tier really doesn't matter. I do like to get into the group fights sometimes, and I think Mass Spell Reflection is really good for that in BGs. I prefer Blade Storm because you can use Blade Storm both offensively and defensively. When you pop Wreck and you're enraged, Blade Storm does a crap ton of damage, right? And also if you're in a battleground, you use things like the Strength Potion, you use your trinkets. I mean, it does a crap ton of damage, and it can clear out people who are low geared inside of a single Blade Storm. So you can win 1v2s and 1v3s against people that have bad gear very easily, because you can kill them all pretty much at the same time with Blade Storm quite often. And again, it can be used defensively since it makes you immune to CCs. So if you see a CC being dropped, for example, there's a hunter, he drops down a binding arrow, well, you can Blade Storm right through it and stay on top of him. Or if you're running against a mage that's like hitting you with a bunch of roots, you force this blink, you force blazing speed, right? Then you get on him, blade storm, so he can't keep you rooted to keep you off of him. And anger management, I think, is the best here. Again, Siegebreaker and Sudden Death are choices that you would use if you have a healer and you're doing a burst build. But again, for a survivability build, I really don't care about burst that much. And anger management is the way to go, because that is all about sustain. It lowers the cooldowns on many key things that you need in this build. Right? It lowers the cooldown on Blade Storm, which is where your big damage is coming from in this build. Stormbolt, so that's control and anti-kiting. It lowers cooldown on Heroic Leap, again anti-kiting. Recklessness, damage, and Die by the Sword, defense. So this is the best choice for a sustain and survivability build. Okay, for the glyphs. Glyph of Bloodthirst increases the healing of Bloodthirst by 100%, so that's why my Bloodthirst will heal me for 2% of my health. And you're going to say, well, 2% of your health, that's insignificant, that doesn't even matter. Well, yeah, it's not a big, huge heal, but you have to keep in mind that you're using Bloodthirst and Shield Barrier, right, when you're getting focused. And when you add these two things up, that is significant survivability. A shield absorb is the same thing as a heal if you're the one that's being attacked. And if you are running solo, which it seems like a lot of the people are complaining about, then you're going to have to use Bloodthirst and Shield Barrier as your survivability. Okay, Glyph of Enraged Speed. While enraged, you move 20% faster. So with this build, Enrage is up almost 100% of the time. So that is a constant 20% movement speed buff pretty much right there. Obviously, you have issues if you're being kited and you're not able to hit something, right? Then you're not going to be enraged. But if you get on something and hit them, well, you're going to have that 20% movement speed buff. And that's also really good, synergizes well with Blade Storm, because Blade Storm, when you look at the description, all right, so you're immune to movement impairment and loss control effects. And if you are enraged while you're doing this, it allows you to move faster while you're doing it, which is really good sometimes to even use as a gap closer. If you're running a kiting class that's throwing a lot of roots and snares at you, sometimes it's actually not a bad idea to use Blade Storm to catch up to them. And if you're enraged, well, you're moving faster and you can't be snared or rooted. So it can be used as a gap closer. right? It can be used offensively for damage. It can be used defensively to prevent hard CC. As an anti-kiting choice, I have increased the range of your charge by 5 yards, right? So that's for anti-kiting. Okay, so the PvP set bonuses, the 2-piece. When you charge, the critical strike chance of your next Bloodthirst is increased by 50%. So when you charge, pretty much, you know, you're going to be enraged when you Bloodthirst. But Bloodthirst has such a high innate critical strike chance that if you have Unquenchable Thirst and you're spamming Bloodthirst, well, you're going to be pretty much enraged full time. And the 4-piece bonus, so this is the huge one here, right? This is the huge one. You now generate rage from taking damage. Again, this is for the people out there that want to run solo without a healer. You're complaining, why do I have to have a healer with me everywhere I go in order to, you know, do well on the warrior? Well, you don't. And the reason why is because of this 4-piece bonus. If you're running by yourself, this is, you know how it works. If you're running by yourself, well, you're the one that's getting hit, right? So you're generating rage. And this is why this build that I'm talking about right now does not work well for team PvP, like arena PvP, because if you have a healer or if you have someone else with you, you know, there may be a much better target than you, and the other team is focusing their damage on them, which is not feeding you rage. And if you have a build that's all built around sustain, you know, and not burst damage, well, you're hurting your team if you run this build. This build is a solo build only. Maybe you can do it in 2v2 if your partner is not a healer and if your partner is not a good focus target. Then maybe, you know, this build works okay, because they'll get on you, they'll be feeding you rage, right? And your talent choices aren't then completely wasted. Okay, if you are running this build, then the only choice that you have for your weapons would be the two-handed weapons. And the reason why is because of the extra stats. You get extra stamina. I mean, the extra stats for damage is good as well, but when you're tying it into the survivability aspect of this, you have extra stamina, which means extra health, which means that your bloodthirst heals are bigger. You're spamming bloodthirst, so it's going to increase your healing over time if you go with two-handed weapons. It will make you harder to kill. In Rage, it says it was up 100, well, it just dropped down to 99.1%, but there it said it was up 100% at a time, right? It dropped down because I backed off. With this build, you do not need to invest anything into Critical Strike, right? Because in Rage is up 100% of the time, practically. You put everything into Mastery with this build. And that's nice because let's say you do want to do team PvP, well then you, for your second spec, you have arm, and mastery is what you want for arm. So my suggestion is, if you want a build where, hey, I want to go out and I want to, you know, just run 1v1 or 1vn every once in a while, have some fun in the BGs, casual BGs, but I'm having a problem with survivability, then you could run this Fury Warrior survivability build. You stack it all up with mastery. But then if you want to do some team combat with your friends, well, you just flip over the arms, right? And you don't have to worry about your enchants or your gear choices because mastery works for arms as well.